On New Year's Eve, the veteran's dog led him to an abandoned building. A secret changed his life. You're about to witness an extraordinary story that will touch your heart and restore your faith in humanity. This is the tale of a veteran, his loyal dog, and a discovery that changed everything on the most unexpected night of the year. Before we begin this emotional journey, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our incredible stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when fate intervenes on a cold New Year's Eve in Detroit. The snow fell steadily over Detroit's east side, coating the abandoned houses and empty lots in a deceptive blanket of purity. Marcus Thompson stood at his apartment window, watching the flakes drift past the streetlight below. His German shepherd Duke pressed against his leg, sensing the familiar tension that always gripped his owner during the holidays. The clock on the wall read 8:47 p.m. on December 31st, and the distant pops of early fireworks made both man and dog flinch. Marcus had returned from Afghanistan 3 years ago, but part of him never left. The crowded New Year's celebrations, the noise, the sudden bursts of light, they all took him back to places he'd rather forget. His small apartment in Corktown had become his sanctuary, a place where he could control the environment, where surprises were minimal, and where Duke stood guard against the memories that haunted him. Duke wasn't just any dog. The 2-year-old German shepherd had been trained as a service animal specifically for veterans with PTSD. Marcus had resisted getting a service dog at first, his pride wounded by the admission that he needed help. But Duke had changed everything. The dog could sense anxiety attacks before they fully materialized, would perform deep pressure therapy by lying across Marcus's chest during panic episodes, and would guide him to quiet spaces when crowds became overwhelming. Tonight, though, Duke seemed restless. The dog paced between the window and the door, whimpering softly. Marcus had never seen him act this way before. Usually Duke was calm and focused, especially when he sensed Marcus's anxiety rising with the approach of midnight and its inevitable fireworks display. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked, running his hand through Duke's thick fur. The dog responded by padding to the door and scratching at it, then looking back at Marcus with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to hold more understanding than most humans Marcus had encountered since coming home. Marcus checked his watch. He had planned to spend the evening alone, as he had for the past 2 New Year's Eves. His sister Helen had invited him to her party in Royal Oak, but the thought of being surrounded by drunk strangers making small talk made his chest tighten. His VA therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, had encouraged him to try socializing more, but tonight wasn't the night for breakthroughs. Duke barked once, sharp and insistent. This wasn't his normal behavior at all. Marcus grabbed the leash from the hook by the door, figuring a quick walk might calm whatever was agitating his companion. He pulled on his heavy winter coat, a surplus military parka that had seen better days, and clipped the leash to Duke's collar. The moment Marcus opened the door, Duke pulled forward with unusual urgency. Instead of their typical route toward Roosevelt Park, Duke turned east, heading into the maze of streets that Marcus usually avoided. This part of Detroit was a patchwork of occupied homes, abandoned buildings, and empty lots where houses once stood. The city had been trying to revitalize these neighborhoods for years, but progress was slow, and many blocks remained largely deserted. The cold bit at Marcus's exposed face, and he pulled his hood up. Duke maintained a steady pace, not stopping for his usual sniffing investigations. It was as if the dog had a specific destination in mind. Marcus followed, trusting Duke's instincts. In Afghanistan, he'd learned to trust the instincts of working dogs. They'd saved his unit more than once, detecting IEDs that human eyes would have missed. They walked for 15 minutes, the sounds of New Year's celebrations growing distant. This part of the city was quieter, darker. Many of the streetlights were broken, and the few houses with lights were set back from the road, their windows glowing like distant stars. Marcus's breath formed clouds in the frigid air, and he wondered what had possessed him to follow Duke into this desolate area on New Year's Eve. Duke suddenly stopped in front of a 3-story brick building that had clearly seen better days. It might have been an old factory or warehouse, typical of Detroit's industrial past. Plywood covered most of the windows, and graffiti decorated the lower walls. A rusty chain-link fence surrounded the property, but Duke had found a section where the fence had been cut and pulled back, creating an opening just large enough for a person to squeeze through. "No way, Duke. We're not going in there," Marcus said firmly. But Duke was already pulling toward the opening, whimpering with increased urgency. The dog looked back at Marcus, then toward the building, then back again. In the 2 years they'd been together, Duke had never led him astray. The dog's training was impeccable, and his instincts had proven reliable countless times. Against his better judgment, Marcus followed Duke through the fence. The snow had drifted against the building's entrance, but a side door stood slightly ajar. Duke pushed it open with his nose and entered without hesitation. Marcus pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating a long hallway with debris scattered across the floor. The building smelled of mold, rust, and something else. Smoke, but not from a fire. Cigarette smoke, fresh. Duke moved purposefully down the hallway, his nails clicking on the concrete floor. They passed several empty rooms, their doors hanging off hinges or missing entirely. Graffiti covered the walls, and broken glass crunched under Marcus's boots. His military training kicked in, and he moved more quietly, his senses heightened. Someone had been here recently, maybe was still here. They climbed a staircase to the second floor, Marcus testing each step before putting his full weight on it. Duke never hesitated, pulling forward with determination. At the end of the second-floor hallway, a door stood closed. Light leaked from underneath it, and Marcus could hear something. Movement, maybe voices. Duke scratched at the door and whined. Marcus's hand instinctively went to his hip, where his sidearm would have been in Afghanistan. But he was a civilian now in Detroit, not Kandahar. He knocked on the door, calling out, "Hello, anyone in there?" The sounds stopped immediately. There was a long pause. Then a small voice said, "Please don't call the police. We're not doing anything wrong." It was a child's voice. Marcus's tension shifted to concern. "I'm not calling anyone. My dog led me here. Is everything okay?" There was whispered conversation behind the door, then it opened a crack. A young boy, maybe 12 years old, peered out. His face was thin, his clothes worn but clean. Behind him, Marcus could see a dimly lit room with what looked like camping equipment. "You're not from the city? Not a cop?" the boy asked suspiciously. "No, just a guy walking his dog," Marcus replied, keeping his voice gentle. "Is your family in there?" The boy nodded slowly, then opened the door wider. Marcus stepped inside and stopped short. The room had been transformed into a makeshift living space. Sleeping bags were laid out on foam mats. A small camping stove sat on a table made from a door laid across 2 sawhorses. Battery-powered lanterns provided light. And there were people, a woman who looked to be in her 30s, 3 children including the boy who'd answered the door, and an elderly man wrapped in several blankets. The woman stood up quickly, protective instinct clear in her posture. "We're not squatting. We needed somewhere for tonight. The shelters are full because of the cold and we—" "It's okay," Marcus interrupted, holding up his hands peacefully. "I'm not here to cause trouble. My dog just seemed to think someone here needed help." Duke had already moved past Marcus and was approaching the smallest child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 5. She was sitting on a sleeping bag, tears streaming down her face, holding her arm against her chest. Duke sat down next to her and gently nudged her good arm with his nose. "She fell," the woman explained, her voice breaking. "About an hour ago. I think her arm might be broken, but the emergency rooms are packed tonight, and we don't have insurance, and I don't know what to do." Marcus knelt down next to the little girl. Duke was already working his magic, the child's tears slowing as she petted him with her good hand. Marcus had basic medical training from his military service, and he gently examined the girl's arm. It was swollen and bruised, definitely needing medical attention. "What's your name?" he asked the girl. "Lily," she whispered. "Well, Lily, you're being very brave. My dog Duke thinks you're pretty special." He looked up at the woman. "She needs to go to the hospital. I can drive you." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "We can't afford—" "There's a VA hospital about 20 minutes from here. They have an emergency room that takes civilian overflow on nights like this. They won't turn away a child." Marcus had learned this during one of his own late-night visits, when panic attacks had convinced him he was having a heart attack. The woman introduced herself as Sarah Martinez. The elderly man was her father, Luis, who had diabetes and had been struggling since losing his job at an auto parts plant 6 months ago. The other 2 children were Sarah's sons, Miguel, the 12-year-old who'd answered the door, and Carlos, who was 8. Sarah worked 2 part-time jobs, but they'd lost their apartment 2 weeks ago when the landlord sold the building to developers. "We've been staying with friends, but everyone's got family visiting for the holidays," Sarah explained. I found this place yesterday. It's dry, and with the camping gear from Goodwill, I thought we could make it work for a few nights until the family shelter has space. Marcus looked around the room with new eyes. These weren't addicts or criminals. This was a family caught in the grinding gears of poverty, trying to maintain dignity in an impossible situation. The room was clean, organized. The children's backpacks were neatly arranged, likely ready for school when it resumed after the holiday break. "Let's get Lily to the hospital first," Marcus said. "Then we'll figure out the rest." The trip to the VA hospital was quiet except for Duke, who stayed in the back seat with Lily, his head resting on her leg. The emergency room was indeed busy, but not as chaotic as the regular hospitals. Marcus used his veteran status to expedite Lily's treatment, explaining she was the daughter of a fellow veteran who died in service, a lie that came easily when he saw the relief on Sarah's face. While Lily was getting x-rays and having her arm set in a cast, Marcus sat with Sarah in the waiting room. Miguel watched his younger brother in the children's play area, while Luis dozed in a wheelchair the nurses had provided. "Why did your dog come to us?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus watched Duke, who was performing his trained behavior of providing a calming presence for Carlos, who had been anxious about his sister. "I don't know. He's trained to sense distress, but he's never done anything like this before. Maybe he heard Lily crying from the street." "From 2 floors up and a block away?" Sarah's smile was tired but genuine. "That's some dog." "Yeah, he's special." Marcus paused, then made a decision that surprised him. "Look, I know you don't know me, but I have a 2-bedroom apartment. The 2nd bedroom is just storage right now. You and your family could stay there tonight at least. It's New Year's Eve. Kids shouldn't be in an abandoned building on New Year's Eve." Sarah's pride warred with her desperation, visible in her expression. "We don't take charity." "It's not charity. It's one neighbor helping another. That's what people do, right?" Marcus hadn't felt like anyone's neighbor in years, but saying it made it feel possible. Before Sarah could respond, Lily emerged with a bright pink cast on her arm and a smile on her face. Duke immediately went to her, tail wagging. The doctor explained that it was a clean break that would heal well. He prescribed pain medication and gave them follow-up instructions, never questioning Marcus's story about insurance and payment. It was nearly 11 when they arrived at Marcus's apartment. He quickly cleared out the spare room, which mostly contained boxes he'd never unpacked from his last move. Sarah and her father took the bedroom, while Marcus set up his camping gear, ironically the same kind the family had been using, in the living room for the boys. Lily, still attached to Duke, curled up on the couch with the dog pressed against her. As midnight approached, Marcus found himself in his kitchen making hot chocolate for everyone. Sarah joined him, helping to carry mugs to the living room where her children were watching the New Year's coverage on TV, the volume kept low out of respect for the neighbors. "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said softly. "You don't even know us." Marcus thought about all the nights he'd spent alone in this apartment, Duke his only companion, the walls closing in with memories and regret. "Maybe you're helping me too," he admitted. The countdown to midnight began on the TV. Miguel and Carlos counted along excitedly, while Lily fought to stay awake. Luis had taken his insulin. Marcus had driven him to a 24-hour pharmacy to fill his prescription, and was looking better than he had in the abandoned building. When the clock struck 12, fireworks exploded over Detroit's skyline, visible through Marcus's window. For the first time in 3 years, the sound didn't send Marcus into a panic. Duke was calm beside him. The children's laughter filled his apartment, and Sarah was teaching her kids to say Feliz Año Nuevo to their grandfather. The fireworks were just fireworks, not incoming fire. The bright lights were celebration, not danger. "Happy New Year, Duke," Marcus said quietly, scratching behind his dog's ears. Duke's tail wagged, and he looked up at Marcus with those knowing eyes, as if to say, "This is why we came out tonight." The next morning, Marcus woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation. Sarah had found ingredients in his barely used kitchen and was making breakfast. Luis was teaching Carlos a card game at the dining table Marcus had bought but never used. Miguel was reading one of the military history books from Marcus's shelf, and Lily was throwing Duke's tennis ball down the hallway, giggling as the dog brought it back every time. His apartment, usually so quiet and still, was alive with activity. It should have made him anxious, should have triggered his need for control and solitude. Instead, it felt like something frozen inside him was beginning to thaw. If you're enjoying this incredible story of hope and human kindness, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Make sure to ring the notification bell, because this story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Over breakfast, Sarah shared more of their story. Her husband had died in a construction accident 2 years ago. The company had fought the wrongful death lawsuit, and legal fees had drained their savings. Luis had moved in to help with the kids, but his health problems and job loss had stretched their resources past the breaking point. They'd been walking a tightrope for months and finally fallen off. "But we stay together," Luis said firmly, his English accented but clear. "Family stays together." Marcus understood that completely. His unit in Afghanistan had been his family, and losing them, some to death, others to distance after discharge, had left him adrift. He'd been so focused on what he'd lost that he'd stopped looking for what he could find. "I need to make some calls," Marcus announced after breakfast. He spent the next 2 hours on the phone, calling in favors and connections he hadn't used since leaving the service. His former commanding officer's wife ran a non-profit that helped veteran families. His VA therapist had connections to housing assistance programs. A buddy from his unit worked for a contractor who was hiring. By noon, Marcus had accomplished more than Sarah had been able to in weeks of trying. The non-profit could provide temporary housing assistance and help navigate the insurance claim from her husband's death. The contractor was willing to interview her for an office position that paid twice what her 2 part-time jobs combined offered. The VA had a program for dependent children that would cover medical care for the kids. "Why are you doing all this?" Sarah asked, overwhelmed as Marcus explained each development. Marcus thought about it. The simple answer was that Duke had led him to them, but it was more than that. "For 3 years, I've been surviving, not living. Going through the motions, avoiding everything that might trigger a bad memory. But last night with your family here, the fireworks didn't bother me. The noise, the chaos. It was just life happening. Maybe I needed to remember what I was fighting for over there. It was for families like yours to have a chance." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. Luis stood up, moving slowly, and extended his hand to Marcus. "You are a good man, a hero." "I'm not a hero," Marcus said automatically, the response he'd given to anyone who'd thanked him for his service. But Luis shook his head. "Not because you were a soldier, because you are human and kind. That is heroic today." Over the next few days, Marcus's apartment became command central for Operation Martinez Family, as he'd started calling it in his head. He drove Sarah to job interviews, helped Miguel with his homework, played countless games of fetch with Lily and Duke, and learned to check Luis's blood sugar levels. The spare bedroom became their temporary home while the housing assistance was processed. Dr. Rodriguez was amazed at Marcus's transformation during their next session. "You're different," she observed. "More present. What changed?" "Duke found a purpose for me," Marcus explained, "or maybe reminded me of the one I already had." Within 2 weeks, Sarah had started her new job. The pay was enough to qualify for a decent apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. The non-profit had expedited their application and provided first month's rent and security deposit. The kids were enrolled in after-school programs, and Luis was connected with a diabetes management clinic. The night before they moved into their new apartment, the family gathered in Marcus's living room for a farewell dinner. Sarah had cooked a feast, Puerto Rican dishes that filled the apartment with incredible smells. Luis told stories about his childhood in San Juan. The boys showed Marcus their improved grades, and Lily drew a picture of Duke wearing a superhero cape. "We wouldn't have made it without you," Sarah said as they cleaned up together. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you." "You already have," Marcus replied, and meant it. His apartment would be quiet again after they left, but not empty, not anymore. He'd remembered how to connect, how to care about something beyond his own trauma. "Besides," he added with a smile, "Duke's going to miss Lily. We'll have to visit." The move-out day was bittersweet. Marcus and Duke helped transport their belongings to the new apartment, a bright 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a well-maintained building. It had a small balcony overlooking a park where the kids could play. Luis had his own room, and the boys would share the other while Sarah and Lily took the living room until they could afford a 3-bedroom. As they unloaded boxes, neighbors came to introduce themselves. The building had several families with children, and Miguel and Carlos were quickly invited to join a basketball game in the park. The community Sarah had been desperately seeking was right here, waiting. That evening, Marcus stood in his own apartment, Duke by his side. It was quiet, but not oppressively so. The silence felt different now, peaceful rather than isolating. He'd started to think about what came next. Maybe he'd volunteer with other veteran families in crisis. Maybe he'd go back to school, finish the engineering degree he'd started before enlisting. Maybe he'd just keep being available when Duke sensed someone needed help. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. It was a photo of the kids doing homework at their new kitchen table, Luis reading a newspaper in a comfortable chair behind them. Home, was all the message said. Marcus smiled and showed the photo to Duke, who wagged his tail. They'd done good. They'd found a family in an abandoned building and helped them find their way home. But more than that, Marcus had found his own way back to the world of the living. The weeks turned into months, and the Martinez family thrived. Sarah excelled at her job and received a promotion. Luis's health stabilized with proper medical care and medication. Miguel made the honor roll, and Carlos joined the school band. Lily's arm healed perfectly, and she started kindergarten with enthusiasm. Marcus and Duke remained part of their lives. Sunday dinners became a tradition, with Marcus teaching the boys basic self-defense, while Sarah taught him to cook Puerto Rican dishes. Luis and Marcus would play dominoes, the older man consistently beating the veteran, while offering wisdom disguised as casual conversation. "You saved us," Luis said one evening as spring arrived in Detroit. "Duke saved you," Marcus corrected. "I just followed." "No," Luis insisted. "Duke brought you to us, yes, but you chose to help. You chose to open your door, your home, your heart. That was you, not the dog." Marcus had started attending veteran support groups, sharing his story of finding purpose through helping the Martinez family. Other veterans responded, sharing their own struggles with isolation and purposelessness. Together, they started an informal network, checking on each other, offering help when needed. Dr. Rodriguez noticed the change immediately. Marcus's hypervigilance had decreased. His anxiety attacks were less frequent and less severe. He was sleeping better, eating better, engaging with life rather than just enduring it. "What Duke did that night," she said during one session, "leading you to that family, do you think it was coincidence?" Marcus had thought about this often. "I don't know if Duke heard something or sensed something or if it was just chance, but I don't think it matters. What matters is that I followed him. I trusted him enough to walk into the unknown, and everything changed because of it." One afternoon in late spring, Marcus received a call from Sarah. She was crying, but they were happy tears. The wrongful death lawsuit had finally been settled. The construction company, facing mounting evidence of safety violations, had agreed to a substantial settlement. It wouldn't bring her husband back, but it would secure her children's futures. College funds could be established. Luis's medical care would never be a concern again. "We want to do something to pay it forward," Sarah told Marcus when he and Duke visited that evening. "Like you did for us, help another family that's struggling." Together, they brainstormed ideas. Marcus had connections through the VA and veteran networks. Sarah understood the bureaucracy of poverty, the maze of assistance programs that were available but nearly impossible to navigate alone. Luis had the patience and wisdom to mentor other grandfathers raising grandchildren. The boys could tutor younger kids, and even Lily wanted to help, suggesting Duke could visit sad children. By summer, they had formed an informal organization, not a registered non-profit, that would come later, but a network of families helping families. Veterans like Marcus, who had space and resources. Families like the Martinezes, who had survived crisis and could guide others through it. Duke became something of a mascot, his picture on the flyers they posted at VA centers and community boards. The first family they helped together was a young veteran named James, his pregnant wife Maria, and their toddler son. James had lost his job due to PTSD-related issues, and they were living in their car. Duke found them, of course, leading Marcus on another unexpected walk that ended at a park where the family was trying to stay cool in the summer heat. The network swung into action. Marcus provided temporary housing. Sarah navigated the assistance programs. Luis watched the toddler while Maria went to prenatal appointments. The boys helped James create a resume and practice for interviews. Within a month, James had a job, they had an apartment, and another family had been pulled back from the edge. Each success strengthened the network. Each family helped became helpers themselves. The movement grew organically. spreading through word of mouth and occasionally Duke's mysterious intuition for finding people in need. One evening, as summer turned to fall, Marcus hosted a barbecue for all the families they'd helped. His small apartment couldn't accommodate everyone, so they used the community garden space behind his building. There were 15 families in attendance, nearly 60 people total. Children played while adults shared stories and resources. Duke moved through the crowd like a four-legged therapist, somehow knowing who needed his attention most. Sarah stood beside Marcus as they watched the gathering. "Look what you started," she said. "We started," Marcus corrected. "All of us. Even Duke. Especially Duke," Sarah laughed. "But Marcus, you need to know something. That night, New Year's Eve, when Lily fell, I had given up. I was sitting in that cold building, watching my father struggle to breathe, my children trying to be brave, and I had given up. I thought we were going to become another statistic, another family destroyed by circumstances beyond our control." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes, and then Duke walked through that door, followed by a man who had every reason to walk away but didn't. "You didn't just give us shelter that night. You gave us hope. You showed us that strangers could still care, that community still existed, that we weren't alone." Marcus felt his own eyes burning with unshed tears. In Afghanistan, he'd fought for abstract concepts, freedom, democracy, security. But here, in Detroit, he'd found something concrete to fight for. Not with weapons, but with kindness, connection, and the simple act of opening his door when Duke told him someone needed help. As the barbecue wound down and families began heading home, Miguel approached Marcus. The boy had grown several inches and carried himself with new confidence. "Mr. Marcus," he said formally, "I've decided what I want to be when I grow up." "Oh yeah? What's that?" "A veteran," Miguel said proudly. "Like you." Marcus knelt down to Miguel's level. "Being a veteran means serving in the military first, and that's a big decision that you've got time to think about. But what makes me proudest isn't my military service. It's what we do after, how we serve our communities, how we help each other. You don't need to be a veteran to do that." Miguel nodded seriously. "Then I want to be like you and Duke, someone who helps." As fall progressed toward winter, the network continued to grow. Local news picked up the story, dubbing Duke the angel dog of Detroit, much to Marcus's embarrassment. Donations started coming in, not money but practical things. Furniture, clothing, job leads, offers of temporary housing. The community was responding to the community's need. Marcus had started dating, something Dr. Rodriguez had been encouraging for years. Her name was Janet, a nurse at the VA hospital who'd noticed him during his many visits with families needing medical help. She understood PTSD, understood the walls veterans built, and was patient enough to help him dismantle them brick by brick. Duke approved of Janet immediately, which Marcus took as the ultimate endorsement. She joined their Sunday dinners with the Martinez family, fitting in seamlessly. Lily declared Janet her new best friend after she painted the little girl's nails in sparkly purple polish. One December evening, as the first anniversary of that fateful New Year's Eve approached, Marcus sat in his apartment, reflecting on the year. The spare bedroom that had housed the Martinez family now served as an office for the network, complete with filing cabinets of resource information, a computer for helping families apply for assistance, and a bulletin board covered with photos of families they'd helped. Duke lay at his feet, older now but still alert, still ready to signal when someone needed help. The dog's graying muzzle rested on Marcus's foot, a constant grounding presence. The phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice excited. "Marcus, you need to come over. Bring Duke." When they arrived at the Martinez apartment, Marcus found it full of people, families they'd helped, volunteers from the network, friends from the neighborhood. A banner hung across the living room. "Thank you, Marcus and Duke." "It's not my birthday," Marcus said, confused. "No," Sarah said, "but it's almost the anniversary of when you saved us, and we wanted you to know what that means." One by one, families stood to share their stories. James and Maria, whose baby daughter had been born healthy and safe in a real home instead of a car. An elderly veteran named Tom, who'd been isolated and suicidal until the network found him and brought him back into community. A single mother named Denise, whose teenage son had been heading toward trouble until Miguel started tutoring him, turning his grades and attitude around. Story after story, each one tracing back to that moment when Duke had pulled Marcus out of his apartment and into the cold Detroit night. The ripples of that single act of following his dog's instinct had spread far beyond what Marcus could have imagined. Luis stood last, moving slowly but with dignity. In Puerto Rico we have a saying, "En la unión está la fuerza." In unity there is strength. Marcus, you and Duke showed us that unity still exists. You reminded us that we are not alone, that we are stronger together than apart. He raised a glass of coquito, the Puerto Rican eggnog Sarah had made for the occasion. To Marcus and Duke, who brought us together, and to all of us who stay together. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Duke, startled by the noise, looked up at Marcus with confusion. Marcus knelt and hugged his dog, whispering, "You did this, boy. You did all of this." As the party continued around them, Marcus thought about the journey from that lonely New Year's Eve to this moment. He'd spent years believing he was broken. That war had stolen his ability to connect with the world. But Duke had known better. Duke had known that the skills that made Marcus a good soldier, loyalty, protection, sacrifice, also made him a good neighbor, a good friend, a good man. The anniversary of that New Year's Eve arrived with another snowstorm. Marcus and Duke walked through Corktown, following their usual route. But when they passed the abandoned building where they'd found the Martinez family, Marcus stopped. The building had been demolished over the summer, part of Detroit's ongoing renewal. Where it once stood, there was now an empty lot with a sign, "Future Site of Martinez Family Community Center." Sarah appeared beside him, bundled against the cold. "The settlement money," she explained. "We're building something permanent, a place where families in crisis can find immediate help, where veterans can connect with resources, where kids can get tutoring and hot meals." She showed him the architectural plans on her phone. The building would have emergency family quarters, a veterans resource office, a children's area, and, at Lily's insistence, a special room for therapy dogs like Duke. "We're calling it Duke's Place," Sarah said with a smile. Marcus was speechless. Duke, oblivious to his impending fame, was more interested in sniffing a particularly intriguing patch of snow. "Construction starts in spring," Sarah continued. "We want you to be the director, you and Janet if she's interested. Who better to run it than the man who started it all?" Marcus looked at the empty lot, envisioning the building that would stand there. A place born from a moment of crisis, built on a foundation of compassion, dedicated to the simple principle that had guided Duke that night. When someone needs help, you help. "I'll think about it," Marcus said, though they both knew he'd already decided. As winter deepened, Marcus threw himself into planning for Duke's Place. He attended non-profit management workshops, met with city officials, and coordinated with various assistance organizations. Janet joined the effort, her medical knowledge invaluable in designing the health services component. Duke, now definitely showing his age, still accompanied Marcus everywhere. The vet had found some arthritis in his hips, and his muzzle was more gray than brown now. But his spirit remained unchanged, his dedication to his work unwavering. One snowy evening in February, Duke did something he hadn't done in months. He became agitated, pacing and whining at the door, just as he had that New Year's Eve over a year ago. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and Duke's leash, and they headed out into the storm. This time Duke led him to a different location, a bus stop where a teenage boy sat alone, no coat, visibly shivering. The boy looked up as they approached, his face a mask of defiance and fear. "Are you okay, son?" Marcus asked gently. The boy, he couldn't have been more than 16, shrugged. "Just cold." Duke sat down next to the boy, leaning against him, sharing his warmth. The teenager's tough facade cracked slightly as he petted the dog. "When's the last time you ate?" Marcus asked. Another shrug. "Yesterday, maybe." Marcus recognized the look, the defensive posture, the careful distance. Foster kid, probably. Aged out or ran away. The system had failed another one. "There's a diner around the corner," Marcus offered. "How about some food? Duke here won't leave until he knows you're okay, and I'm getting cold." The boy, his name was Terrell, told his story over hamburgers and fries. Foster care since age 8, 12 different homes. Aged out at 16 through a bureaucratic loophole, had been sleeping in abandoned buildings, surviving on whatever he could find or steal. "I'm not a bad kid," Terrell insisted. Nobody ever wanted me permanent, you know." Marcus knew. He understood unwantedness, understood feeling disposable. The military had given him purpose, belonging. Terrell had never found his equivalent. "You ever meet the Martinez family?" Marcus asked. "They run an informal network for people who need help." By the end of the night, Terrell was sleeping on Marcus's couch, Duke curled up beside him. Sarah had already begun making calls, finding resources for aged-out foster youth. Luis had offered to teach Terrell his trade. He'd been an electrician before the auto parts plant. Miguel and Carlos had promised to introduce him to their friends, to help him feel less alone. Terrell was just the beginning. As word of Duke's place spread, more youth in crisis found their way to the network. Some were referred by social workers, others by teachers or police officers who'd heard about the program. Each one was met with the same combination of practical help and genuine care that had saved the Martinez family. Spring arrived with groundbreaking for Duke's place. The ceremony was attended by city officials, news crews, and dozens of families. Duke, wearing a special bandana for the occasion, was given the honor of digging the first ceremonial hole, which he did with enthusiasm. Marcus stood at the podium, unaccustomed to public speaking but knowing it was necessary. "This place," he began, his voice carrying across the crowd, "started with a dog's instinct and a family's need. It grew because people remembered how to be neighbors, how to care for strangers, how to build community from crisis." He looked at the Martinez family in the front row, at Terrell standing with the other youth they'd helped, at Janet beside him, at Duke lying at his feet. "We call it Duke's place because Duke taught us something important. Help doesn't need to be complicated. Sometimes it's as simple as following when someone leads you to where you're needed. Sometimes it's opening your door on a cold night. Sometimes it's just showing up." The construction of Duke's place became a community effort. Veterans with construction skills volunteered their time. Local businesses donated materials. Families who'd been helped by the network came to paint walls and lay flooring. Even the children contributed, creating murals for the youth areas under the guidance of a local artist. As summer reached its peak, Duke's health began to decline more rapidly. The arthritis was worse, and the vet found a mass in his abdomen. Surgery was an option, but at Duke's age, with no guarantee of success, Marcus faced an impossible decision. "He's been a working dog his whole life," the vet said gently. What would he want? Marcus knew. Duke would want to keep working, keep helping until he couldn't anymore. So that's what they did. Pain management kept Duke comfortable, and he continued his rounds, slower now, but no less dedicated. He visited the construction site daily, supervising in his way. He still sensed when someone needed comfort, still offered his presence as healing. One August evening, Duke led Marcus on one last walk. Moving slowly, deliberately, he took Marcus to every significant spot in their shared journey. The park where they'd first played fetch after Marcus adopted him. The VA hospital where Duke had waited patiently through countless therapy sessions. The spot where the abandoned building had stood, now showing the rising frame of Duke's place, the Martinez family's apartment building. At each stop, Duke paused as if saying goodbye. They ended up back at Marcus's apartment as the sun set over Detroit. Duke climbed onto his favorite spot on the couch, something Marcus had never allowed before his illness. Marcus sat beside him, and Duke rested his head on Marcus's lap, sighing contentedly. "You did good, boy," Marcus whispered, tears flowing freely. "You saved me. You saved all of us." Duke's tail wagged weakly, and he looked up at Marcus with those wise brown eyes one last time. Then, peacefully, surrounded by love, Duke let go. The funeral was held at the construction site of Duke's place. Hundreds attended, families Duke had helped find, veterans he'd comforted, children he'd played with. The Martinez family created a memorial garden where Duke was laid to rest, a place of peace in the heart of the community center he'd inspired. Sarah spoke at the service. "Duke showed us that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they have 4 legs and wet noses. Sometimes they show up when you've lost all hope, leading someone to help you. Duke didn't just find people in crisis. He created a family out of strangers, a community out of isolation." Marcus couldn't speak. Janet held his hand as person after person shared stories of how Duke had touched their lives. Lily, now 7 and articulate beyond her years, read a poem she'd written about the dog who'd saved her family. Terrell, who'd been accepted into a technical program for electrical work, talked about the night Duke found him at the bus stop. As the service ended, a surprise visitor arrived. Another German shepherd, younger, energetic, led by a trainer from the same program where Duke had come from. "This is Hope," the trainer explained to Marcus. "She's been in training as a service dog, but she's got something extra, like Duke did. She needs a special handler, someone who understands that service isn't just about the veteran, but about the community." Hope approached Marcus cautiously, then sat at his feet, looking up at him with eyes that held familiar intelligence and purpose. "Duke picked her," the trainer added. "We brought him to evaluate puppies a year ago when he could still travel. He spent the whole session with this one. We think he was choosing his replacement." Marcus knelt down, and Hope placed her paw on his knee, just as Duke used to do. It wasn't about replacing Duke, nothing could do that. It was about continuing the work, carrying forward the mission of finding those in need and bringing them home. Duke's place opened that October, just before the second anniversary of that fateful New Year's Eve. The building was beautiful, warm, welcoming, designed to dignity rather than just functionality. The emergency family suites were small but private. The Veterans Resource Center was staffed by volunteers who'd been through the programs themselves. The youth area was vibrant with Terrell's friends' artwork and equipped with computers donated by local tech companies. The therapy dog room, Duke's den as everyone called it, was special. Photos of Duke covered one wall, and his collar hung in a place of honor. Hope had already begun working, seeming to understand the legacy she'd inherited. Opening day was organized chaos. Families seeking help, volunteers offering services, city officials touring the facility. Marcus, as director, moved through it all with Janet, solving problems, making connections, ensuring everyone felt welcome. As evening approached and the initial rush calmed, Marcus stood in Duke's den with Hope, looking at the photos of his old friend. The Martinez family joined him, Sarah, now the assistant director, Luis, the volunteer coordinator, the children, all involved in various programs. "He would be proud," Luis said simply. "He would be working," Marcus replied with a sad smile. "Probably would have found 3 more families by now." A knock at the door interrupted them. A young woman stood there holding a toddler, a scared look in her eyes. I heard you help people. We've been sleeping in our car, and it's getting cold, and I don't know what to do." Without hesitation, Hope walked over to the woman, sat down, and leaned against her leg. The woman's tears started flowing as she petted the dog. "You're in the right place," Sarah said gently. "Come on, let's get you and your little one something warm to eat, and we'll figure everything out." As Sarah led the woman to the kitchen area, Marcus realized the cycle was beginning again. Another family in crisis, another chance to help, another opportunity to build community from chaos. That New Year's Eve, the second anniversary of Duke finding the Martinez family, Duke's place hosted its first annual celebration. The main room was full of families, those in temporary residence, those who'd been helped before, volunteers, supporters. Children played while adults shared food and conversation. Marcus stood to address the crowd, Hope by his side. 2 years ago tonight, my dog Duke dragged me out of my apartment and into a blizzard. I thought he was crazy. Turns out, he was just seeing something I couldn't. That isolation isn't safety. That protecting yourself from pain also protects you from joy. That the only way to heal is through connection. He looked around the room at all the faces, all the stories of crisis and recovery, struggle and support. Duke taught us that help often comes from unexpected places, that a veteran with PTSD and a homeless family could save each other, that a therapy dog could build a community, that the smallest act of kindness, following your dog into the snow, can ripple out in ways you never imagined. As midnight approached, instead of watching the ball drop on TV, everyone went to the memorial garden. Candles were distributed, and in the cold, clear night, they stood around Duke's resting place. "Make a wish," Sarah told the group. "Not for yourself, but for someone who needs help, someone who's out there tonight, cold and scared and alone. Wish for them to find their way here, to find their Duke, their Marcus, their family." 100 candles flickered in the darkness. 100 wishes for strangers not yet met but already loved. Hope sat beside Duke's marker, alert, as if listening for the next call to action. The fireworks began over Detroit, bright explosions of color and sound. Marcus didn't flinch. These were celebrations of life, of community, of the possible. Lily held his hand on one side, Janet on the other. The Martinez boys were teaching Terrell and his friends Spanish songs. Luis was telling stories to a group of elderly veterans. Sarah was already planning tomorrow's programs. This was Duke's true legacy, not just a building, but a living, breathing community that understood a fundamental truth. We save each other. One person, one family, one dog at a time, we save each other. As the celebration wound down and families began returning to their homes, temporary or permanent, struggling or stable, Marcus walked through Duke's place one last time before closing up. In each room, he saw Duke's influence, the gentle way volunteers approached those in crisis, the patience with which problems were solved, the assumption that everyone deserved dignity and help. Hope followed him, learning the routine, understanding her role in this place. She was different from Duke, younger, more energetic, perhaps not as intuitive yet, but she was learning, growing into the job Duke had left for her. In his office, Marcus found an envelope that hadn't been there before. Inside was a note in careful handwriting. "Mr. Marcus, you don't know me, but Duke found my son last year when he was thinking about ending his life. Your dog just walked up to him in the park and wouldn't leave. My son followed Duke home to you, and you got him help. He's alive today because of Duke, because of you. I wanted to donate to Duke's place, but I don't have money. So I'm giving the only thing I have, a promise. I promise to help one person this year, the way you helped us. And I'll ask them to help someone else. Let Duke's love keep spreading. A grateful mother." Marcus sat down heavily, the note trembling in his hands. How many stories like this were out there? How many lives had Duke touched that Marcus would never know about? Hope came over and rested her head on his knee, offering comfort as Duke had taught her, or perhaps as she instinctively knew. Marcus petted her, thinking about the future. Duke's place would grow. They'd already been approached about opening satellite locations in other neighborhoods. The model was being studied by non-profits in other cities. The ripples continued to spread. Spring came early that year, and with it, unexpected news. The city of Detroit wanted to honor Duke posthumously with a special recognition, the first animal to receive the Spirit of Detroit Award. The ceremony would be held at Duke's place, with the mayor presenting the award to Marcus and the Martinez family. The day of the ceremony, the building overflowed with people. Media covered the event, sharing Duke's story with an even wider audience. Donations poured in, ensuring Duke's place could expand its services. But more importantly, people shared their own stories of unexpected help, of animals and humans who'd appeared at just the right moment. The mayor spoke eloquently about Duke representing the best of Detroit: resilience, loyalty, the ability to find hope in the darkest places. But it was Lily, now 8 and confident, who stole the show. "Duke was magic," she said simply into the microphone, standing on a box to reach it. "Not pretend magic, but real magic. The magic that happens when somebody helps somebody else just because they need help. Duke taught us that magic, and now we can do it too." After the ceremony, as people toured the facility and shared refreshments, Marcus noticed Hope behaving strangely. She was pulling toward the door, whining softly, exhibiting the same behavior Duke had shown on those nights when someone needed help. "Go," Sarah said with a knowing smile. That's what Duke would do. Marcus clipped on Hope's leash and followed her out into the spring afternoon. She led him 3 blocks to a small park where an elderly man sat on a bench, clutching his chest, struggling to breathe. Marcus called 911 while Hope stayed with the man, keeping him calm until paramedics arrived. Later, at the hospital, Marcus learned the man was a Vietnam veteran named Robert, who'd been living alone since his wife died. The heart episode was minor, but it revealed a dangerous living situation. No food in his apartment, medications unfilled, complete isolation. "Duke's place?" Robert asked when Marcus explained where he worked. "I read about that dog. Always wanted a dog, but my building doesn't allow them." Within a week, Robert was a regular at Duke's place, volunteering in the Veterans Center, sharing his stories with younger veterans, finding the community he'd lost. Hope had found her first save, continuing Duke's work. As Duke's place approached its first full year of operation, the statistics were remarkable. Over 200 families helped with emergency housing, 150 veterans connected with resources, 75 aged-out foster youth given support and guidance. But the numbers didn't capture the real story. The web of connections, the community that had formed, the lives saved not just from crisis, but from isolation. Marcus stood in Duke's den one evening, Hope beside him, looking at the wall of photos that had grown beyond just Duke. Now it included all the therapy dogs who volunteered, all the families who'd passed through, all the moments of connection and recovery. Janet joined him, slipping her hand into his. They'd gotten engaged at a small ceremony in the memorial garden, with Hope as ring-bearer and the entire extended Duke's Place family in attendance. "Regrets?" she asked, knowing Marcus sometimes struggled with how different his life had become. "No," Marcus said without hesitation. "Duke knew something I didn't, that my war wasn't over. It had just changed. Instead of fighting against enemies, I'm fighting for families. Instead of destroying, I'm building. This is what I was meant to do. Duke just had to show me the way." As if in agreement, Hope's tail wagged and she looked toward the door. Another family had just walked in, looking lost, scared, desperate. Sarah was already moving to greet them, Louise preparing food, the kids setting up the children's play area. This was Duke's true monument, not a building or an award, but a living system of care that activated whenever someone needed help. It had started with one dog's instinct and one man's willingness to follow. Now it was unstoppable, self-sustaining, growing. Marcus watched the new family being welcomed, saw the relief in their eyes as they realized they'd found help. Somewhere, he was sure, Duke was watching too, tail wagging, satisfied with a job well done and a legacy well established. The cycle continued, as it would tomorrow and the day after that. People in crisis would find their way to Duke's Place. Hope would sense those who needed extra comfort. The community would rally. And slowly, family by family, life by life, they would rebuild what had been broken, restore what had been lost, and prove that even in the hardest times, in the coldest nights, help could arrive in the most unexpected ways. As Marcus, Janet, and Hope headed home that evening, they passed the spot where Duke had led him that first New Year's Eve. Marcus paused, remembering the fear and uncertainty of that night, the resistance he'd felt to getting involved, the voice in his head that had told him to turn back. "Thank you, boy," he whispered to the empty air. "Thank you for not letting me turn back." Hope looked up at him, then forward, ready for whatever came next. Together they walked into the gathering dusk, knowing that somewhere out there, someone needed help. And when the moment came, they'd be ready, just as Duke had taught them. The work would never be finished. There would always be another family in crisis, another veteran struggling, another youth aging out of care. But that was okay. That was the point. The helping itself was the healing. The community itself was the cure. Duke had understood that from the beginning. It had just taken the rest of them a little longer to catch up. But now they had, and Duke's love, disguised as a simple dog's instinct to help, would ripple outward forever, touching lives that would never know the story of a German shepherd who walked into an abandoned building on New Year's Eve and changed everything. This was Duke's story, but more than that, it was Detroit's story, America's story, humanity's story. The endless capacity for redemption, connection, and hope, sometimes arriving on four legs, asking nothing more than that we follow where kindness leads. The next morning brought fresh challenges and fresh opportunities. A family of refugees from Syria had been referred to Duke's Place, bringing language barriers and cultural differences that would require new solutions. Terrell had been accepted into college with a full scholarship, the first in his foster care cohort to achieve this. Robert, the Vietnam veteran Hope had found, wanted to start a program connecting older and younger veterans. Marcus convened the morning meeting in the main hall of Duke's Place. The core team had grown. Sarah, Louise, Janet, several other veterans, formerly homeless individuals who'd become counselors, and always, at the center of every gathering, Hope and the rotating cast of therapy dogs who'd joined the mission. "Every day, Duke's legacy grows stronger," Marcus began, "not because of this building or these programs, but because each person we help becomes a helper. Each family we save saves another. That's how we honor Duke, by never stopping, never turning away, never forgetting that we're all just one crisis away from needing help, and one act of kindness away from providing it." The meeting continued with logistics and planning, but Marcus's mind drifted to a conversation he'd had with Dr. Rodriguez the previous week. She'd remarked on his transformation from isolated veteran to community leader. "Duke didn't cure your PTSD," she'd observed. "He gave you purpose that was bigger than your trauma. He showed you that your military training, the hypervigilance, the protective instincts, the ability to act under pressure, these weren't symptoms to be suppressed, but skills to be redirected." She was right. Marcus still had bad days, still flinched at certain sounds, still struggled with crowds sometimes, but now these challenges existed within a framework of meaning. Every panic attack he managed was experience he could share with another veteran. Every sleepless night was an opportunity to answer the crisis hotline. His wounds had become his wisdom. As the meeting concluded and everyone dispersed to their various duties, Hope approached a young woman who'd been sitting quietly in the corner. The woman was heavily pregnant, with the hollow look of someone who'd given up hope. Hope, living up to her name, gently placed her head on the woman's knee. "That means you're family now," Sarah told the woman softly. "Hope doesn't choose wrong. Let us help." The woman's story unfolded slowly. Domestic violence, pregnancy from assault, family rejection, nowhere to turn. It was the kind of complex crisis that Duke's Place had learned to handle, not just with emergency shelter, but with legal advocacy, medical care, psychological support, and most importantly, community embrace. Within hours, the woman, Rebecca, had a safe room, a medical appointment, a legal advocate, and a support group of other survivors. Lily, now old enough to help with childcare, promised to babysit when the baby came. Luis offered his rocking chair for the nursery. The community wrapped around Rebecca like Duke used to wrap himself around those in pain. This was multiplication of kindness that Duke had started. Each act inspired another, each rescue created another rescuer. The mathematics of compassion were exponential, not linear. That evening, as Detroit settled into another night, Duke's Place remained bright and busy. In the Veterans Center, a group therapy session was processing trauma through art. In the youth wing, Terrell was teaching computer skills to other aged-out foster kids. In the family quarters, Rebecca was sharing her first meal in days while Hope kept vigilant watch. Marcus made his rounds, checking on each area, solving small problems, offering encouragement. This was his patrol now, not through dangerous streets in Kandahar, but through halls of healing in Detroit. As he reached the memorial garden, he found someone unexpected, his old commanding officer, Colonel James Harrison, standing at Duke's marker. "Sir?" Marcus was stunned. They hadn't spoken since Marcus's discharge. "I heard about what you've built here," the colonel said. "Heard about Duke. I had to see it for myself." They stood in silence for a moment before the colonel continued. "We train soldiers to break things, to destroy threats. We don't train them for how to build instead of break. But you figured it out, Thompson. You and that dog of yours." The colonel explained that he'd been struggling since retirement, that many of their unit were facing similar challenges. He wanted to know if the Duke's Place model could be replicated, if Marcus would help establish similar centers near other VA facilities. "Duke's work isn't done," Marcus replied. "I don't think it ever will be." Plans were made, partnerships discussed. The colonel would use his connections to secure funding and locations. Marcus would provide training and consultation. Duke's Place would become not just a single point of light, but a constellation of care across the country. As the colonel left, he paused at the door. "That dog of yours saved more than just that family, Thompson. The ripples of his action, of your action, they're still spreading. They'll never stop spreading." Summer arrived with its own challenges and victories. Rebecca's baby was born, a healthy girl she named Grace. The Syrian refugee family had established a Middle Eastern restaurant that employed other refugees. Terrell graduated from his technical program and immediately began an apprenticeship while mentoring other foster youth. Duke's Place had become more than a crisis center. It was a hub of transformation, a place where broken people discovered they weren't broken at all, just temporarily bent by circumstances. The therapy dogs, Hope and her growing pack of volunteers, continued Duke's work of sensing need and responding with presence. One particularly hot July evening, a thunderstorm knocked out power to half of Detroit. Duke's Place, equipped with generators thanks to a recent donation, became a cooling center. The building filled with neighbors who'd never needed services before, but now found themselves vulnerable to the heat. Marcus watched as the regular Duke's Place community welcomed these new faces. No distinction was made between those in crisis and those just seeking relief from the heat. Everyone was neighbor. Everyone was family. This was Duke's deepest teaching, that the line between helper and helped was imaginary, that everyone moved back and forth across that line throughout their lives. An elderly woman approached Marcus, her face vaguely familiar. "You don't remember me," she said, "but 3 years ago you and Duke walked past my house every day. I was so depressed after my husband died, I decided to end things. But one day Duke broke away from you and ran straight to my porch. Wouldn't leave until I came out and petted him. That silly dog visited me every day for a month, until I didn't need him anymore." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. How many secret rescues had Duke performed? How many lives had he touched in ways Marcus never knew? "I volunteer at the senior center now," the woman continued. "I tell them about Duke, about how help can come with 4 legs and a wagging tail. 23 seniors have gotten therapy dogs because of Duke's story. The ripples, young man, the ripples never stop." As fall approached, marking nearly 2 years since Duke's passing, Marcus received an unexpected package. Inside was a manuscript, "The Duke Effect: How One Dog's Instinct Created a Movement." A journalist had spent months interviewing families helped by Duke and Duke's Place, tracing the expanding network of aid and connection. The stories were staggering. A teenager who'd been stopped from suicide by encountering Duke's story online. A police officer who'd started a therapy dog program after visiting Duke's Place. A wealthy philanthropist who'd funded 3 similar centers after reading about Duke. The Syrian refugees whose restaurant now employed 12 people and fed dozens of homeless individuals daily. But it was the final chapter that broke Marcus completely. It was written by Miguel, the Martinez boy who'd once dreamed of being like Marcus. Now 17, Miguel described how that New Year's Eve had changed not just his family's circumstances, but their entire understanding of community. "Duke showed us that we're all connected," Miguel wrote. "That one person's crisis is everyone's concern, that one dog's compassion can reshape a city. I've watched Mr. Marcus and Hope continue Duke's work, but the truth is, we're all Duke now. Every time we help instead of walking past, every time we open our door instead of locking it, every time we see need and respond, we're Duke." The book would be published, with all proceeds going to Duke's Place and its satellite locations. But more than money, it would spread Duke's story further, inspiring more action, more connection, more hope. On the 2nd anniversary of Duke's death, a statue was unveiled in the Memorial Garden. Not a grand monument, but a life-sized bronze of Duke sitting alert, watching, waiting to help. The plaque read simply, "Duke, he showed us the way." The ceremony was beautiful, with hundreds attending, but it was what happened after that truly honored Duke's memory. Hope suddenly began pulling toward the street, exhibiting that familiar, urgent behavior. Marcus and Janet followed, along with several others. 2 blocks away, they found a teenager standing on a bridge, looking down at the water below. Hope reached him first, gently taking his sleeve in her mouth, pulling him back from the edge. The boy collapsed, sobbing, as the Duke's Place community surrounded him with support, not judgment. Later, as the boy, Anthony, was safe in the youth wing, receiving care and connection, Marcus realized this was Duke's true monument. Not a statue or a building, but the continued instinct to help, passed from Duke to Hope, from Hope to the next generation of therapy dogs, from person to person in an endless chain of compassion. Winter came early that year, with November's snow that reminded everyone of that fateful New Year's Eve. Duke's Place was at capacity, with 3 more locations under construction in other cities. The model had been studied, replicated, adapted. Duke's instinct had become a movement. Marcus, now married to Janet, stood in their apartment, the same one where it all began. They'd kept it simple, a reminder of where the journey started. Hope lay in Duke's old spot on the couch, alert even in rest. "Do you ever wonder," Janet asked, "what would have happened if Duke hadn't pulled you out that night?" Marcus had wondered, especially in quiet moments. He would have remained isolated, broken, slowly disappearing into his trauma. The Martinez family might not have survived that winter. All the families helped, all the connections made, all the lives saved, none of it would have happened. "Duke knew," Marcus said simply. "Somehow he knew that saving them would save me. That building community would heal what isolation couldn't. He knew before any of us did." As if in response, Hope's tail thumped against the couch. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside Duke's Place and in hundreds of homes connected by its network, families were warm, safe, together. The phone rang. Another crisis, another family in need, another opportunity to continue Duke's work. Marcus answered, listened, promised help would come. It always did now. Duke had made sure of that. As the 3rd New Year's Eve, since that first faithful night approached, Duke's Place prepared for its annual celebration. But this year would be different. This year, they weren't just celebrating survival, but triumph. The Martinez family had purchased their first home, a modest 3-bedroom house 6 blocks from Duke's place. Luis's health was stable, managed by consistent care. Miguel had been accepted to the University of Michigan with a full scholarship, planning to study social work. Carlos was thriving in high school, president of the Student Volunteer Club. Lily, now 9, had started a junior therapy dog program, teaching other children how to work with animals to help people. Terrell had not only graduated from college, but had started his own electrical contracting business, specifically hiring other aged-out foster youth. Rebecca had become a counselor at Duke's place, using her experience to help other women escape abuse. The Syrian family's restaurant had become a cornerstone of the neighborhood's revitalization. Each success story created more success stories. Each person helped became a helper. Duke's simple act of leading Marcus into the snow had created an avalanche of kindness that showed no signs of stopping. On New Year's Eve itself, the celebration at Duke's place was larger than ever. The main hall overflowed with families, volunteers, supporters, but at 8:47 p.m., the exact time Duke had first gotten restless 3 years ago, everyone fell silent. Marcus stood to speak, Hope beside him. 3 years ago tonight, Duke changed all our lives. He saw connection where I saw danger. He saw family where others saw strangers. He saw possibility where anyone else would have seen hopelessness. He looked around the room at the hundreds of faces, each with their own story of crisis and recovery. Duke's been gone for over 2 years now, but look around this room. He's still here, in every act of kindness, in every moment of connection, in every time we choose to help instead of look away. We are all Duke's legacy. As midnight approached, everyone moved to the memorial garden despite the cold. The bronze Duke seemed to watch over them, snow gathering on his ears and nose. Hope sat beside the statue, a living continuation of its subject's mission. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Each number shouted by hundreds of voices. Children who'd been homeless, veterans who'd been suicidal, elderly who'd been forgotten, teenagers who'd been discarded, all together, all family. At midnight, instead of fireworks, they released biodegradable lanterns into the sky, each one carrying a wish for someone still in need, someone still waiting for their Duke moment. The lanterns rose like prayers, like promises, like hope itself ascending into the darkness. Marcus watched them rise, Janet's hand in his. Hope pressed against his leg. Somewhere out there, someone was in crisis. Someone was alone, afraid, desperate. But also somewhere out there, someone was ready to help. The network Duke had started would find them, connect them, save them both. "Thank you, Duke," Marcus whispered to the snowy sky. "Thank you for showing us the way." Hope barked once, sharp and clear in the cold night. Then she turned toward the building, toward warmth and light and community, leading them all back inside. There was work to do tomorrow, people to help, connections to make. Duke's work was never done. It would never be done. And that was exactly as it should be. The ripples continued to spread, unstoppable now, a permanent wave of compassion that had started with one dog's instinct and one man's willingness to follow. In a world that often seemed broken beyond repair, Duke had proved that healing was possible. One rescue at a time, one connection at a time, one moment of choosing love over fear at a time. This was Duke's story, but it was also Detroit's story, humanity's story, the endless capacity for redemption and grace, delivered not through grand gestures, but through simple acts of showing up, paying attention, and responding to need with presence. And somewhere in the space between what was and what could be, Duke's spirit lived on. In Hope's instinct, in Marcus's purpose, in Sarah's determination, in every hand extended to someone in need. The German shepherd who'd walked into an abandoned building on New Year's Eve had become something larger than himself, a symbol and a system, a memory and a movement. The work continued. The work would always continue. And that itself was the miracle. Not that suffering existed, but that compassion existed to meet it, multiplying with each encounter, growing stronger with each connection, proving again and again that love was not only possible, but inevitable, when people remembered they belonged to each other. Duke had known this all along. It had just taken everyone else a little while to catch up. But now they had, and the world was different because of it, better because of it. More whole because a dog named Duke had refused to let his human remain isolated, had insisted on connection, had demonstrated that the only real security came not from walls, but from community. This was Duke's greatest teaching and his lasting gift. We save ourselves by saving each other, and the saving never ended. If this incredible story touched your heart and reminded you that miracles can happen when we open ourselves to helping others, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell to join our community of people who believe in the power of compassion and connection. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, because you never know, you might be the Duke in someone else's story. Thank you for witnessing this journey of hope. And remember, sometimes the greatest adventures begin when we simply follow where kindness leads.